Hi, I'm Chris from Development. Let's take a look at how we can incorporate Coronium Core into a Corona project by using the Coronium Core plugin. And to do that, I'm here on the docs and I'm in the client guide section. And the first thing we want to do is to make sure that we have our plugin set up in our build settings. And you can see here a little outline on how you do that. Over here in my Corona project, I just have a basic Corona project set up here. In my build.settings, I've gone ahead and put this information here in the plugins section, and this will make sure that the plugin is pulled from the server and is compiled into the project when I build the project out. So to use the Coronium Core plugin, there's a few things we need to do. The first thing is we need to require the plugin, and I usually put this under the core namespace, and this is what it is referred to in the documentation, so it might be easiest just to use that. So we do a require plugin Coronium Core, and that will pull that in. And then the next thing we'll need to do is initialize the core namespace here with our server information regarding our Coronium Core server. So to do that, we use the init method. And inside here we'll need a couple pieces of information we pass in this table. So one of the keys is server key, and then we put in our Coronium Core endpoint, and I have one set up at core.development.com, and then the other vital piece of information will be the server key. Now in the installation video I showed quickly how you can get this key from the server, but we'll go ahead and do it one more time. You only need to grab this one time. So what we want to do is we want to log into our Coronium server. So I'm going to SSH as my Coronium user and my endpoint. And once we log in, we're going to give our password. And then to get the key to the server, it's Coronium space key, and then we will get this output here. Just go ahead and copy this key here, and we're going to paste that into our Corona project. And now we have all the information we need to log into our Coronium Core server and issue commands against it. So the cool thing about Coronium Core is there's kind of a basic mode and then a more advanced mode. In the advanced mode you can create your own server-side APIs and then call them using the plugin, and this is how you build more complex data type queries. To use the full power of the Mongo and the MySQL modules, you do need to build server-side APIs for that. But for basic data handling and basic MySQL usage, you can just use the module that's supplied in the plugin itself. And in the documentation here under client module, you can see some of the things that you can do just directly from the client side without having to write any server-side code at all. And one of those is the data module. And this is basically kind of a simplified interface into the Mongo database that's present on your Coronium Core server. I do have to make a note that if you did not install Mongo, then you will not be able to use this module. So that's just something to note there. You will, of course, be able to use the MySQL module, so you can do that there. First thing we want to do is to make sure that everything's working, we should go ahead and save some data up to the server. So I'm going to check out the save command here on the data namespace. And all API methods, except for the files API, which is a little bit different, so you need to kind of go through the section on files, the documentation there, to see how that one works. But for pretty much everything else, you'll be passing two different things to the methods, and that will be a data parameters table, and this is the data that is going to be sent up to the server for it to do whatever it needs to do. And then a listener, which is a callback for the response from the server. And like other networking pieces in Corona, you need to supply a callback listener. And so here we can see the parameters that we're passing here. The data parameters is a table, the listener is a function, and in the case that the endpoint doesn't take any data parameters, you can actually just leave that out and just pass the listener. but in most cases it will take data parameters, except for if you've built your own API endpoints, it might not be necessary. The parameters that we have to pass in that table are the source, which is basically a Mongo collection. We have a data key, which will be the data object that we're going to save. And optionally, we can pass a specific database if we want to. The data module, to keep it simple, already has a pre-configured database on Mongo that it uses, so this is completely optional. Here we'll see the event response, and on success on this save method we will get the ID of the newly created object, and that will be in the result key. So to talk a little bit about the responses we can get back, basically all responses except for the files, of course, we will get an error key or a result key, and we can use that to check our results that we get back. If we get an error, then we want to check for that, and then if we don't get an error, then anything that we got back from the server is going to be in this result key. So let's take a look at how we can build this out. I'm going to go ahead and in this demonstration code for the save method here, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and we'll just go ahead and paste that right here into our project. So basically what we have going on here is we have this data object that we're going to save to the database, and we got a string, number, boolean, and an array here. We need to build our listener, and that will take back an event. We're going to check if the event has any errors. If it does, we'll print it out, and if not, then we'll print the event.result, and in this case, for this method, that result will actually be the object ID that was created. Next, we go ahead and we're going to issue the core.data.save, and our source is going to be a users collection. We'll just store this in users, and then as data we're going to pass the data object that we created up here with this information, and then we will pass the listener, and once that all fires off, we'll get that information back in here. So let's go ahead and save that up, and we'll jump over to Corona and we'll look at the output here in the console. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh that. And as you can see, our output here is this ID that we've just created for this data. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and grab it so that we can use it in another method here in a second. Now one other neat function is the when you're developing, sometimes you just want to, if you're not quite sure what your result may be, you can go ahead and use the core.debug method, and this will give you kind of a human readable format for the event object. So we can look at what this looks like. We're going to run this again. It's going to create another record, and as you can see here, it shows result, and then what our result actually is, and it's this key here for the data. So that's how you save some data up to the database. Let's go ahead and retrieve this so we can get a better look at this. So to do that, we're going to need our listener function. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this one, and we'll use that. And then to get data, we use the core.data.get, and we need to pass it either one of two things. We can either pass it a table with a query, or we can pass the string ID directly. And I can get this information here in the documentation under get. In our data parameters, we pass the source, which in our case is going to be users, and then the query key is going to be a query table or the string ID. And for this example, we're just going to use the string ID. And on the result will be a table, which will be the data object, and it should be very similar to the one that we sent up here the first time. So to construct this, we'll go ahead and use source equals users, and our query is just going to be our ID. So I saved this one here just for ease, so we'll pop that in there, and then we need our callback, and that's going to be our API listener. So when we run this, we should get the data back here. Let's go ahead and refresh. And here we can see that in our result we got our ID. Here's the ID here of the record, and then the rest of the data that we sent up. Here's our active and all the other pieces of information, and it's printed out in this format because we're using this debug here. If we wanted to just drill down to a specific piece of information, let's say we just want the age, then we could just do print event.result.age, and then we can run this again, and then you can see here we're going to get the number 32. So as I said, you can also pass a table as a query, and these are it's a Mongo query. So let's go ahead and just see what that looks like. Instead of the ID here, we'll just pass a table and we'll ask it for a specific name, and in this case we can look here and we know that we have the name Sally, so we can say name equals Sally, and we should also get that back. Let's make sure we're doing this right. Okay, we need to close off the table here, and then when we do our call we're going to get this back, and then we got that age event. If we wanted to see more of this, again we can use the core.debug, and we just pass the whole event to that. If we want to be more specific with our query, we can add other keys to it. So I want a record with the name Sally, and I also want to make sure that the age is 32. So once I do that, then I can call it and I'll get that data back. So that shows a basic example of how to use the data module, and again this is kind of a simplified interface to Mongo. And then there's some other methods here as well. The files handles your uploads and downloads of your files, and they also have a couple different interesting things you can do here. And in the demo project here, you can find on the documentation, you can download this demo project, and it actually shows how do you do the file upload and download, and a little bit more extensive examples on the data module aspect. And so once that's in place, then you can go ahead and just kind of play around with that. I will show a little bit about the API module and the server modules regarding building your own API in another video. So that should get you started, at least in the client side here, for your Corona projects utilizing Coronium Core. Thanks for watching.